Hello YouTube, and welcome to the second lore debate, or rather lore discussion. As today we're talking about the Second Great War, and the invitee and I, Mr. HeathVO, we had a lot of things to agree on, so in the end we ended up just discussing the Second Great War and just debating on smaller subjects. Anyway, I think that the discussion that you're about to hear is still quite interesting, and I really recommend putting it on as a sort of podcasty format, as the visuals are not very special. So yeah, I'll hope you enjoy our discussion. Alright, hello everyone, welcome to the second lore debate. Last lore debate with Kenny Dawkins was received quite well. Today the second lore debate is recorded, and I wish welcome to everybody who is currently in the Discord audience and to everybody watching on the YouTube recording later. Yeah, you guys know who I am. Today I'll be debating Mr. Russian, who is here today to debate me on a bit on the Second Great War. So yeah, Mr. Russian, please introduce yourself.
Alright, firstly I'd like to say hello everyone. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Heath Owens, aka The Russian, and I am an Elder Scrolls nerd, quite possibly like everyone else here today. I'm very excited for this discussion / debate with you, Mr. Imperial Knowledge, on our Great War speculation, well, the Second Great War speculation, and I'm very excited to see the detail we put in on either side to find out which would come out on the greater end there. Thank you for introducing me.
Alright, so as I said before, we will be debating the Second Great War. We'll be talking a bit about Second Great War, and probably the discussion might go all kind of ways. Yeah, I'll allow Mr. HeathVO / The Russian to make his entrance statement, and we'll start.
Alright, to start off with, I feel we could say both sides are ready and preparing for a Second Great War with each other. I mean, with the evidence in the game Skyrim, it is quite obvious, as I found a quote from General Tullius saying, "Most of the legions are tied up at the border with the Dominion, and most of the legion's forces in Skyrim are auxiliary locally recruited, as sending in a full trained and battle-hardened legion risks weakening the Empire's defenses and invite the Dominion to take advantage of that and launch an attack." So, what I'm thinking is the Second Great War is almost inevitable. It's gonna happen no matter what. It's just a matter of who will attack first. And through evidence in game dialogue, as I just said, General Tullius says another one's coming, and he doesn't like his situation, but he feels it is a very, quote, necessary thing to keep their army the way it is so they can prepare for the Second Great War. So that's what I'm going to say there.
Alright, well, in this case I'll be taking the opposite stance, and I'll be saying that, well, you make a couple of good points, and I agree on a lot of what you said. I'm first gonna close my window, because you hear cars go by. Don't worry, I'll cut this out. Alright, so while I agree with a lot what you said, I don't think a Second Great War isn't necessarily inevitable. It's likely to happen, but at least it's not inevitable that it I completely lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
I'm also not completely sure. Alright, let me start over, please. So while a Second Great War, I would say, is indeed inevitable in the long run, I think that especially in the short term, and with that I mean the first 100 to 200 years or so, is not necessarily inevitable, because as the Thalmor say in the Understone Keep, there's this guy on Dolomar, I believe it is, who walks around there. He basically says, yeah, well, we have patience because we have longer lifespans, and we want to prove the superiority of Mer over man 1 century at a time. Essentially indicating, well, we don't care how long it takes, but at one point we will prove it. And another thing that I'd say that will mean that at least in the short term a Great War isn't necessarily inevitable is that in the last war the Dominion got pretty severely battered. I mean, the Empire also didn't get the long end of the stick, so to say, but it's definitely, the Dominion will definitely have become wary of the Empire, and thus, at least in the short term, I'm not sure whether they would attack the Empire or not, and therefore at least as long as those troops stay south of the border, I don't think that the Dominion will necessarily initiate an attack in the short term.
Okay. Well, with that though, with the short term, I say going back to your First Great War and how you said the Dominion is weary of the Empire. I say, and if the Empire held out after the Battle of the Red Ring and they could have continued pushing the Dominion out, they instead of letting them say, "Hey, sign this treaty and give us Hammerfell and all that other stuff," and the loss of Hammerfell was pretty sad for a bigger empire all around. But the Red Guards endured, and they ultimately beat the Dominion at the Treaty of Stros-Mackay. So, with that, if the Empire held out, they could have ultimately won in the long run there of the war, and could have saved from a second Great War. So, it's just a matter of how the first one ended, which could have caused a second one not to have happened, so to speak. You know what I'm saying there?
I know what you're saying, and while definitely it's a possibility that the Empire might have won, there's a really big realm of uncertainty here. I mean, I covered it in a video a while ago, but this is essentially what I called the Elder Scrolls lore foundation problem, where we don't have the exact foundation to have the discussion on, because we need to discuss what the foundation of the discussion will be, because the whole case with the war in Hammerfell, at least, is that the wording of that war is very precise. Like, it says the Red Guards fought the Dominion to a standstill, after which the Treaty of Stros-Mackay came. That can completely mean that the Red Guards basically just completely pushed them out until the beaches and then fought them to a standstill at the beaches and then basically forced the treaty. Or they were just able to hold the line, barely, and then the Dominion at one point was like, you know, this is pointless, we'll just stop, we'll leave with the Treaty of Stros-Mackay. I mean, we don't know exactly which version of those events happened, or if it's maybe a completely different event. I mean, the same is going for the Empire in Cyrodiil. We know a little bit more in that sense, because the information on Cyrodiil is a bit more than we have on the information in Hammerfell. But it's completely possible that the Empire might have been able to push out the Dominion after the Battle of the Red Ring. But you need to remember that we know that after Red Ring, the Empire's forces were also severely battered. And as far as we know from the specific wording, at least as far as I remember from the sources, is that the Dominion's attack army got destroyed, but their garrisons all over southern Cyrodiil were still active. So even if the Empire was going to push forward, they'd still have to conquer all of southern Cyrodiil and fight by Dominion garrisons. While if they just assigned the treaty, they would get back all of southern Cyrodiil basically guaranteed. Because while it's a possibility that they would be able to push them out, it's also a possibility that the Dominion would be able to regroup in time and then just push back on them. So I think that in this case, signing the treaty was definitely the wise thing to do.
I agree. For the signing the treaty would have been the best thing for a kind of rebuild of either side, trying to at least prepare for a second Great War. After that, they were not ready for the first one. Like, the Dominion came in, swooped in with the heads of the Blades agents there from Valenwood and I believe elsewhere, and Somerset Isles, all three of them. They brought them in on a wagon and said, "Here, these are your Blade agents. We don't want them in our land." And they started pushing, attacking, and taking land, and that's what ultimately kind of started the First Great War there. But at the end, I agree. I would say maybe afterward, the treaty was good to give everybody a bit of breathing room. It's a quote, let me see, by General Tullius again after the Civil War. "The fiercest of the remaining rebels will continue to harass us, but by and large people have desired peace. What I'm not so sure about is the peace we've made with the Thalmor, but we'll keep that between the two of us, alright?" I think with the signing of the White Gold Concordant, that peace they had is only going to be a temporary peace, meaning, again, a second Great War is going to come eventually. I would say, inevitable. So that peace, I would say, with the Concordant treaty, it was good just for a... Let me think of what I was trying to say with that. It's good for a standstill kind of area, a breathing room. You know what I'm saying? Like a buffer.
Yeah,
Like,
I know what you mean. Like it's basically the way that you're trying to describe is a temporary armistice, if that makes sense. If that's my right
yeah,
word.
kind
Yeah.
of like in modern day North and South Korea, how they had that standstill after 53 until modern day 2019, where they signed a treaty saying, "Hey, we're done, we're good," you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I know what you mean. Um, I personally don't think I think that this could very well be a Korea-like situation if you want to go that way, where while it's at least regarded as a temporary treaty on the side of the Dominion, because as you said, they see it as the first Great War against the Empire, and also by the higher ups in the Empire, as Tullius also very poignantly says that he's not very sure of the peace with the Thalmor. I think that just like Korea, it could just be that for years and years and years nothing happens. I mean, it's very possible that, as Omdolomar says, with this thing with, yeah, we are willing to prove the superiority of Mer over man 1 century at a time, it's very possible that that basically means that they'll just do nothing for 300 centuries, what am I saying, for 300 years, until the Empire gets lazy again. I mean, they know that right now the Empire is very much on its feet with all of its soldiers at the border, but all they have to do is wait for a moment that the Empire's once more weak, and they have the time because they have the lifespans for it.
yeah, and you're right with that. I would say I'm going to go start off with some speculation here. It's been about 25 to 26 years since the First Great War, which was in years 4th Era, 171 to 175, and Skyrim takes place in 4th Era, 200 201 years there. So that's about 25 26 years, which has given a population kind of boost for the Imperial provinces to get their numbers back, kind of like a baby boom, like in the World War II in our modern day timeline there. And we have veterans such as Leggett Ricky and Ulfric. I'm sure there's plenty more that would go and fight another war, so they would have the veterans, their children, and the children there would be just being born and just growing up and getting to age when a second Great War would be possible. So looking at that, it could be a double or triple than what numbers we initially had in the first Great War timeline. So if another war was to happen, numbers I would feel would be more on the Imperial side, because High Elves, they are very selective breeders and stuff, and they do not have children very often. I believe you said that in your sex procreation on Tamriel video.
Yeah.
With, on the High Elf section. So they're very selective breeders, and I don't believe you say anything about inbreeding. I highly doubt that between the High Elves, but it is possible it happened in modern day timelines to keep royal bloodlines pure, the inbreeding and stuff. So they may have practiced some of that in the Dominion to keep pure magical bloodlines.
Well,
but
oh, sorry, continue.
No, you can continue. I lost my train of thought on that after that.
The way that it's not necessarily inbreeding what they do, but the way that at least it's been... Oh, sorry, I should mute my phone. The way that at least it's been presented to us is that the High Elves likely do a practice eugenics, where basically imperfect... oh god, YouTube's so gonna demonetize me after I said that word. No, okay. It's likely where they just... the idea is that they kill sort of imperfect babies. I'm very careful with the wording here. But yeah, the question basically becomes then, like, that's one of the reasons that they're, at least as far as we know, that their breeding is so slow compared to man. But the question is, if the Thalmor would just forcibly stop that in order to get their population back in order, would that mean that they would have enough population to contend with the Empire, or would their breeding pattern still be slower than that of humans? I mean, I don't have the answer to that. I mean, maybe you do, maybe you know, but I don't know, at least. But that's my...
I mean, I've looked into some of the breedings of the elves and stuff, and since they have longer lifespans, I feel they are not as likely to have children at such young ages like humans. We have short lifespans, or maybe about 70, 80 years is about our max for living, and we start having our kids about sometime between 18, 19 to about 30, that'd be the prime time to have children, and that's why I say the Empire has that year gap, 25, 26 years, because they would have kids, the veterans would have kids, and then at that time, their kids would have kids starting to be growing up and stuff like that. That's why, but with the Dominion High Elves, their age difference, they're not as wanting to have kids as much, I would think, than a human would, because we are meant to expand and grow our numbers as humans, but elves, they try to stay pure. And the way you were saying it, imperfect, like children and stuff, I would see that as like a kind of like Spartan type nature. I don't know how well you know about Spartan history, how they would kill an imperfect baby or throw them off a cliff. Don't get demonetized, YouTube. I'm sorry for my saying that.
Yeah, I'll just preemptively just put it on demonetization.
Okay, I'm sorry that I took it from you. But like, I can see the Dominion and High Elves, the way they're thinking of it, being Spartan in nature with their children. But if you want to boost in numbers, I would say be a bit more lenient in the kids and stuff. But if the High Elves and the Thalmor took that, what you said, away with their selective breeding, then I could see a population boost there, but it would still take time for that. I feel like it's more so than it would for humans. You know what I'm saying?
I agree when we're talking about, for example, the High Elves, but do remember that the Dominion is comprised of 3 provinces. Now, I don't know the exact breed rate of the Bosmer, but I do know that the Khajiit breed rate is at least comparable to that of humans. Now, of course, the moons play into that, and what type of Khajiit they will become, and whether they'll even be able to battle. I mean, so we have the little Khajiits, I've got their names, who are definitely not going to be able to get into battle. But if the Dominion has a strong grip on elsewhere, which we also don't know how strong the grip is, they might be able to force elsewhere to join them in a Second Great War, and thus they might have a lot more troops than that they would have without elsewhere. And thus they might be able to compensate the Empire's greater numbers a bit with that.
And in my speculation, I have 2 theories here for, say, a Dominion-sided attack or an Imperial-sided attack. But in both of my roads for either Imperial or Dominion victory, I did say the Empire would be in a more kind of better position to attack, and they would be going for the Dominion instead of the Dominion coming for them. So the first province I said would be elsewhere, being taken by the Empire. The Empire would take it and try to get them back into their folds. And what I said for the Dominion side is they would just leave elsewhere as collateral damage, so to speak. So that would be my theory of it. The Empire would try to take elsewhere and try to re-implement them back into the Empire, while the Dominion would lose elsewhere or leave them as collateral damage. That's what I'm thinking on that.
Well,
but it just depends on like how loyal they are to the Dominion. I know they helped them with the quote Void Knights and all that other situations and stuff there. What do you think on that?
When we view the Empire as being capable of launching an attack on the Dominion itself, then I definitely agree with you by saying that elsewhere would probably be the first target. But I've got a couple of issues with the idea. Like, for example, the Empire doesn't have necessarily trained soldiers for jungle combat and desert combat. Well, maybe the desert, because of course Hammerfell. But elsewhere and Valen would both have very specific tropical terrains, and it takes a completely different fighting style to sort of, what's the word, adapt to that. And I mean, it's still very possible that they might be able to do it, because I mean they've done it during the Riemann Empire and during Tiber Septim's time. But even then, there's the issue of, well, is the Empire even in a position to attack the Dominion lands? Because when we think about the situation that we get in Skyrim, where General Tullius is essentially trying to fight Ulfric with, well, peasants, or at least local recruits, to put it nicely, because the Emperor won't send any reinforcements down. that gives us somewhat of a insight into what is going on at the border, because if you want to attack them, you might want to have an attack force, and an attack force you always need to have be bigger than a defense force. But we specifically know that if he takes legions from the border to Skyrim, that he'll leave Cyrodiil vulnerable. Thus, that means that it's probably not an attack force, because you could take a few men from an attack force and then probably still be fine in Cyrodiil's protection, because a protection defense army can rely on forts and other like local defense that you can erect up, while an attack army needs to do everything on its own. Meaning that if it's a problem to even take one legion, or at least the men needed to quell the rebellion in Skyrim, from the border, that would mean that if that's a problem and that it would leave Cyrodiil vulnerable, that would mean that that army on itself is probably not an attack army, and is probably not able to advance into Dominion territory.
Okay. In that logic, who do you think would start the Second Great War, the Dominion or the Empire?
It's hard to say, honestly.
I have my theories, and tell me what you think.
It's hard to say, honestly, because I think that the Empire is very unlikely to start, especially in the current situation. I mean, I'm of course not able to speculate on what they would be able to do in, like, let's say 100 years or even like 30 years, because that's a lot can change in that amount of time. But at least in the current situation, if a Great War were to start like the minute after Skyrim's gameplay, I definitely say that it's probably the Dominion.
Okay. And that's the what I had in my speculation too. I'd say the Dominion would strike first, like the first initial Great War, but I don't think it would be as impactful as they were in the first war, because in the first war, the Empire was very unprepared for it. They weren't expecting it, but this time they are prepared. So I feel like instead of the Dominion going in, being able to just go in and clean up shop and take over and stuff, no, I think the Empire would be able to repel them and push them back, and that would be the momentum needed to push into further Dominion lands, like elsewhere and so on. Like the Dominion, the first time they attacked in the First Great War, it was more impactful, and the Empire wasn't prepared. But this time, the Empire would be prepared more so, and they may be able to repel and counteract the Dominion charge, and that momentum from the counterattack towards the Dominion may be what they need to push into further Dominion lands. That's what I'm thinking.
I can agree to an extent. I mean, in such a scenario, they'd have to completely destroy the Dominion attack army, like just devastatingly destroy, and then have enough troops remaining for a counterattack. I mean, I can't imagine that the Empire doesn't have plans on what they would do if they got the chance to counterattack. So yeah, I definitely say that it's a possibility.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, stay in a scenario where the Empire wins elsewhere and there's Valenwood to take care of. Maybe the jungle experience in elsewhere, and I was reading somewhere there is a Bosmeri resistance against the Thalmor and the Dominion that's working with the Empire and the Penitus Oculatus. I don't quote me on a source because I cannot find where I found that, but I have heard that speculation, and maybe the Bosmeri resistance knows where to find high-valued Dominion targets and forts and way forts to help establish an Imperial kind of battleground for the Empire to help try to fight the Dominion. In this scenario I wrote up, instead of most of the fighting being in like Hammerfell and Cyrodiil, this one would be more so in Valenwood and elsewhere of a more momentum favoring Imperial side of war.
I mean, I definitely agree, and I can actually provide you with the source because you're completely right. It's in the Elder Scrolls novels, Infernal City and Lord of the Souls. They're the Penitus Oculatus parts, the Penitus Oculatus chapters of those books. They basically have a few lines pertaining to the Penitus Oculatus assisting Bosmer rebels in Valenwood. Now it's my time to not know where I got the other thing, but I I don't remember if it was those novels or not, but we know that Bosmer resistance is at least severely weakened after some point. But yeah, I agree that if the Bosmer resistance is still alive and the Empire still has good contacts with it, that kind of resistance definitely can help with recon and with selecting targets. I mean, that's basically what happened during World War II, where the resistance actively helped the approaching troops at many key points. So yeah, I agree with it. As far as the hypothetical goes.
Okay. Now that's a. Oh, sorry. You can continue.
Yeah, I wanted to put a side note to it where like I already said, that I'm not sure whether the Empire will even have the manpower to do a counterattack, but in the hypothetical that the Empire is able to destroy a significant part of the Dominion invasion force and then is able to counterattack, then I definitely think that at least that Bosmer resistance could indeed help with selecting targets and maybe make that campaign at least more of a success than it would be without it.
Yeah, I understand that. Fair enough. Okay, but that was an Imperial favoring sided scenario. What do you think a Dominion sided scenario would look like? Say the fighting was still in Valenwood and elsewhere. What do you think would go on there? Or do you think the Dominion may try to go somewhere else to attack the Empire, as they may think the fighting will just be on the southern border of Cyrodiil? Do you think the Dominion may try to go out north and flank them in from High Rock or Skyrim? What do you think on those parts?
Well, I've speculated in the past that they might come through Black Marsh, but that was, to be honest, a very bad speculation on my part. For I think the same reason that I think that it's unlikely that they'll come through, for example, High Rock or Skyrim, because then their supply lines would be far too big. I mean, we know that the Imperial Navy is, at least used to be, on par with their Altmeri counterparts, and if they wanted to attack Skyrim or High Rock, it would require the Altmeri Navy to make massive supply lines with the Imperials if they just amped up like boat and naval production, which they could very much disrupt, and then they'll have the troops there in the north completely cornered. So it's possible that they do another like Hammerfell-like landing, but then in High Rock or in Skyrim in the Second Great War. But I think that that's more like a sideshow compared to Cyrodiil, because Cyrodiil, the main attack will have to take place, because that's where they can keep the supply lines as small as possible.
I agree with that, and keeping the supply lines as slow as possible. My reasoning for thinking a northern invasion might somewhat work, because if you look at Skyrim's situation right now, they're still trying to clean up from the Civil. Say it's closer from the Civil War time. This is the speculation that they're hypothetically close to the Civil War. They're cleaning up after the Civil War, and there's the Empire is controlling it and still has the infighting. As Tolia says, there's still going to be patches of rebels here and there. They're trying to deal with them and maintain them, and they can completely catch them off guard with a Northern Dominion invasion. And with an Imperial southern border protected, it leaves the northern counties of Cyrodiil unprotected. I mean, I'm sure Bruma and all those other cities up north have their own legions and protective forces, but if they come from the north, and while the Imperial thinks the main fight's in the south, then that can ultimately just whoosh, just come in and take over. You know what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, it's still, you still have the problems, of course, of very much stretched supply lines if you attack in such a place. But I mean, okay, it could definitely serve as something of a sort of lure for the Empire to sort of lure away their troops from the border and then strike at the south when their troops are on their way to the north to combat their attack in the back, if that makes sense.
I understand that, yeah.
I'm looking at what points we might have left to discuss.
Okay. Hammerfell, what do you think their situation is? Do you think after they, like, I kept them out of the speculation for the Imperial and Dominion side, because they're pretty much a wild card at this point. They pushed the Dominion out, but their relations with the Empire isn't that great either. So which side do you think Hammerfell will kind of be more favoring if the Second Great War to happen?
I mean, in the case of a second Great War, I'm personally thinking that Hammerfell will most likely side with the Empire, because they have a common enemy in the Dominion, because the Dominion essentially wants to prove Elvish superiority over men. And Hammerfell is mostly comprised of Redguards, who are a race of men. So I think that definitely the Redguards would side with the Empire, and we already see in many smaller hints within the game that Hammerfell at least isn't the biggest of friends with the Dominion. We don't know their exact relations with the Empire, but we do know that some documents which are very hurtful to the Dominion, like for example the book, what was it called again? Flight Through the Night or something like that, or Flight from.
Hold on, let me check that.
I don't know. It's a book. It's a sort of journal by a Nord who worshipped Talos and then got chased by the Thalmor. And that sort of and that document, what's it called, a journal, is published by a bookkeeper, or at least by the House of Quills, as it's called, of Hammerfell, to be distributed within the Empire, because the Empire can't do it themselves. So while we're not sure how Hammerfell exactly thinks of the Empire, we at least know that they're still very hostile to the Dominion, and we know that after the war, or at least during the war, many nobles of Hammerfell, at least one noble that we actually know of, Dinahan al-Rihad, who is like the Prince of Rihad, or King of Rihad, I don't know the exact title that he had. He had refuge within the Empire and then returned to his country after the war. So they're definitely more sympathetic towards the Empire than towards the Dominion, but they're not going to offer themselves to become a province of the Empire again, I think, because they've probably gotten pretty comfortable in their sovereignty and in their independence.
I agree with that. And what's that mission with the 2 Redguards in Sadia from Whiterun? What's that mission called? Friend in Need? No, Friend in Need.
Something in need.
Sadia.
In my time of need, something like that.
In my time of need, that's what it is. Yeah. If you look in her story, she said they're after me because I spoke out against the Dominion or something like that. That's like, if you side with Sadia, then you're wrong. I feel like, in my personal opinion, because if you look into it, the Redguards fought the Dominion and pushed them out, so she may be a Dominion sympathizer, and that's why they're trying to get her and bring her back for punishment. That's what I'm thinking on that. So,
yeah, I mean, I completely agree on that part, because I've always assumed that Kamatu is right in this. But even if you'd say that Sadia is right, it's both sides can serve as an excellent argument as to why Hammerfell is at least sympathetic to the Empire, because oh no, never mind. No, that's not true. Sorry, I completely misremembered some dialogue from Sadia. No, you're right. Indeed, if you'd say that Sadia is right, then Hammerfell would definitely be more favorable for the Dominion, because, as you said, she spoke out against the Dominion, and that's why she supposedly fled. But as far as we know, Kamatu is right. At least that's where most of the evidence points. But this is one of those things where we're left partly in the dark, in the same vein as where we're left partly in the dark for Morrowind, because even though some evidence points towards Hammerfell being more of a friend to the Empire, it's still very much possible that Sadia's story is true. I mean, it's unlikely, but it's still a possibility, because Bethesda might just still say, you know what, we'll just make it canon that Sadia is right, and depending on what they think the best narrative is. So the fact that both Morrowind and Hammerfell are, at least at the moment, unclear to us what the exact situation and what the exact relation with the Empire is, Yes?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the fact of Morrowind, because I've seen the Morrowind map, from the map of Tamriel, because like you can see like all the different colors on it, and I guess each color of Morrowind stands for like a different house control, like House Redoran, House Telvanni, House everything like that. Officially, I believe Morrowind is still under the Imperial banner, but they're very loosely part of the Empire. If a Dominion where Thalmor agent or ambassador, someone came into Morrowind convincing them, hey, join us. We're Outmer, you're Dunmer, we should be friends and allies. So, and that's why I think may cause a Morrowind type rebellion of sorts, or complete leaving of the Empire and joining the Dominion against the Empire would be with them coming and saying, hey, we're both Mer, they're men, let's show them we're better. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, but I also... I don't remember where it was stated, but I believe that the Thalmor also think that, like, Dunmer are a lesser race of elf. At least that's something that I remember, but I don't know who said it exactly. But what I would like to say on the matter of Morrowind in that sense is that, well, it's likely that they're indeed still sort of loosely tethered to the Empire as sort of part of the Union, but completely independent or in self-rule, something like that. That's a possibility, but it's also still a possibility that they might be independent. If they're independent, I definitely think that the chance of them allying with the Thalmor is a bit higher. But in terms of if they're still part of the Empire, I think that if after all this time, after everything the Empire sort of did to them, they're still part of the Empire, I don't think that they'll definitely side with the Thalmor, as the Empire probably gives them some benefits or something like that to stay in, as they wouldn't have stayed in for so long after not receiving help from the Empire with both the Argonian invasion and with the Red Year. So if they stayed in for all this time, I think they'll remain in, if that makes sense. But if they're out, they might also be a wild card, just like essentially Argonia, which is
Black Marsh, yeah.
And not really a fan of either of the Thalmor or the Empire.
I know in your Great War explained video with the map updated, like you talked about how like they were like a green part of the map. They were just completely by themselves. They didn't really do much, but they may like like you said, like I think you said something like ally with the Thalmor if they gave the swampy lands of Cyrodiil and the southeastern region of sorts to them, so they can at least have a bit of a hold in mainland and like main homeland Cyrodiil. If a Thalmor victory was to happen and get Argonians siding with the Thalmor, but again, it's how Thalmor and High Elves are more prestige about their race and the way they live and think. They will still be thinking lesser of the Argonians because they're a beast race. Like, again, I feel like the Thalmor are against the Khajiit, but they keep them there as like a quote ally enough to just say, hey, if we need you to fight someone for us, they'll do it because they save their Void Knights. But they would see them as a beast race as well. They're being lesser of them, thinking they're
I mean,
that's
basically always been true when the Dominion also included elsewhere, where the Khajiit are basically thought less of. But what you said in terms of Argonia / Black Marsh, it's very true. That's the thing I speculated, that if either the Empire or the Dominion were to offer the Blackwood to the Argonians in exchange for help, I think that the Argonians might be pragmatic enough to just say, you know what, we'll help you if you give that back, because the Anselil, which is the government of the Argonians in the 4th era, they're, by all terms and purposes, they're nationalistic and isolationists, in that they just want to return Black Marsh to the way it was before foreign powers occupied it. And technically speaking, you could say that the Blackwood, which is part of Cyrodiil, the sort of swampy part of Cyrodiil, you could say that that might have that belongs to the original Black Marsh's borders. So they might want to ally themselves with it, but it's also still a possibility that they're like, you know what, we're happy here in Black Marsh because that part of Cyrodiil doesn't necessarily contain a lot of Argonians and would have to go through the hassle of removing the human populations. And you know what, just keep us out of all this and we'll just stay happy in our swamp. That's also a possibility of what they might say. So I'm not really sure on the Argonian wildcard in that sense, but I think that's definitely a possibility that if either of the powers were to offer the Blackwood as a compensation, that they might help either the Empire or the Dominion out, because the Argonians don't necessarily have a love for either of those factions. I have to say that so far it's been less heated the debate than with Kenny, but basically that's because I agree with a lot of your points. A lot of the points are good, and the things that I put against them is basically most of the criticism that I have against my own points. Is there any further comments that you would like to make, or any further things that you'd like to state?
Alright, there's 2 points I have left on my outline here. Is first, Daedric artifacts. I know the Orb of Vermina was a very big thing in the First Great War. What do you think the Second Great War may have in store? Do you think the Thalmor will have anything, or do you think the Empire would try to go into using such methods? In my opinion, I don't think the Empire will, because they're not as evil as a Thalmor to use a Daedric artifact. But they're still out there to be used. What do you think on that speculation?
I mean, in that sense, I don't think the use of a Daedric artifact is necessarily a fact of evil or good. I mean, there's enough Daedric princes who are considered good sometimes. Think, for example, about Daedric Prince Meridia, who basically fights against the undead and who hates the undead, and who's usually considered one of the quote-unquote good Daedric princes. And I also don't necessarily think that the Empire is above using Daedric artifacts if they're presented to them for a Second Great War. I mean, in pre-Elder Scrolls Legends lore, it was basically said that the Emperor used Goldbrand, the Sword of Boethia, in the war. Now, of course, in Elder Scrolls Legends, they sort of changed that to a covered-up hero, the Forgotten Hero, who ended up using Goldbrand, or not using Goldbrand, depending on your choices in the story. Who ended up using it in the Battle of the Red Ring. So I don't think that they're necessarily that they wouldn't use it if the chance got to them. I mean, it's essentially just an ace that you can have up your sleeve in case that the enemy also has something. We can see this when we do the College of Winterhold questline, where the Synod researchers, I don't know its exact names, I believe it's something like something.
I think it's the Synod.
Yeah.
Synod. The Synod in the...
in Mzulft, the Dwarven Ruin,
so,
where they're actively searching for strong magical artifacts to help the Empire, and I don't necessarily think that that artifact being a Daedric artifact or not being a Daedric artifact will stop them. So I don't necessarily think that the Empire is above using Daedric artifacts, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something evil to use Daedric artifacts in that sense. But what I do think in the Dominion side is that they will definitely use it if they can, because they used it in the First War, and they also have, just like the Empire with the Synod, we found out that Ancano, the Thalmor in the College of Winterhold, has essentially just been sent to them to spy on them and retrieve any powerful magical artifacts or magical techniques to give them an edge. I mean, that's the whole reason that he got sent there in the first place. Of course, he ends up being completely corrupted by the power of the Staff of Magnus, but that's another story. So I think that both sides might use Daedric artifacts if they got the chance in Second Great War.
Yeah, on a completely unrelated note about that Ancano mission, the College of Winterhold, that was the hardest quest for me to beat when I was younger, trying to play that for the first time. Like, how do I kill these ghosts and kill him, kill the ghosts, kill him, kill... No, I'm just... That's all. It's just funny the hair.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I just wanted to say I'm just glad it wasn't Morrowind ghosts, because you needed special weapons to beat them.
Oh yeah, but yeah, and the Eye of Magnus 2 and the Stygic coming to take that from the College of Winterhold. I have no idea what's going to be in store for the Stygic Order and the Eye of Magnus there, and they may have just taken it back to their monastery island or whatever and just leaving it there, and they won't be heard or seen from again for however many years. But again, with the artifacts, I feel okay. I like what you said. The Empire may not shy away from it, to get an advantage like the Synod and Resolved. They're trying to find ways to help get an edge. So I can understand using it to try to get an edge on the opponent. But is there anything out there do you think either side would have for an advantage, you think? Like, refresh my knowledge on how the Thalmor got the Orb of Vermina on that. And I know he used it to see the plans and counteract the Empire, but how did they get that? And how would the Empire do something similar to what they did to get something for them in the Second Great War?
Well, that's one of the bigger mysteries that we just don't know how they got their hands on it. But the speculation that I did in my video on Vermina is that they might have done the same as the Wizard in Oblivion did. In Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, I mean, not Oblivion. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Where he stole the Orb of Vermina from the dreams of one of their followers, because Vermina is all about nightmares and dreams.
Oh yeah, the dream shade and stuff.
But yeah, we don't know how they got it, and I think that if in the next game we hear that either the Empire or the Dominion possessed one of these artifacts, it's very likely that Bethesda won't give an explanation for it, and it'll just be a sort of plot point thingy that they just included.
Yeah. Alright, and I guess you could say my final thing. It's more of a theory that may or may not ever happen. Just keep an open mind about it. Say, the disaster at Ionath and the invasion of Akavir by Uriel V. I have a theory where on his last stand, I don't think we have an exact thing of him dying, but he was defeated by the Sayasi, who are vampiric. Maybe they transform him into a vampire for him to live for many years. Do you think if that were to happen, he'd come back with an Akaviri invasion to try and retake Tamriel over again? What would you think on that?
I mean, that's one of the, like a Bethesda employee, I believe it was, essentially said that, or it was taught during that making of Skyrim, doesn't matter who it was, but they basically said that was the first idea that they had for Skyrim's playthrough, where it's definitely possible, because remember that it was the Saci, as the sort of vampiric Saci, it was them who came to Tamriel and in search for Dragonborn, and then bowed for Riemann Cyrodiil and formed the first Dragon Guard. It's very possible that when they found out that Uriel V, when he invaded Akavir, when they found out that he was a Dragonborn as well, that they might have bowed to him as well, and that he's now like ruling Akavir. That's possible, because Bethesda essentially confirmed as such that it's a possibility that they might have made a main quest around. But since they didn't do it, I don't think that this will ever return in that sense, because they shied away from that idea, and they just went they went with Alduin's return and his eating of the world. And because they discarded that concept, I think that it's not likely that it's still gonna happen. But I mean, for all terms and purposes, that theory is something that's possible, because we know that Bethesda themselves at least thought about it in the past. So yeah, I find it an intriguing idea, to say the least.
Alright, and say he comes back with a dragon army. You know the Capotan, I was doing research, there were some that were able to transform themselves into like dragon-like creatures, and maybe say if Uriel lived with the Sayasi, they killed him and he was able to take, I don't know how it would work with Akatosh's dragons and the Capotan forming dragons, if it'll count still as dragon souls for him to increase his power like we can in Skyrim. But say he's able to tame them and learn stuff like we do in Skyrim with the Ben Willshot and the Dragonborn DLC, and he brings them over for that war. I mean, it would be a bit overpowered, I feel like, but it's just all very interesting concepts on what could happen there. And Bethesda, they gave us backgrounds and stuff or an idea of what you said with an Akavir invasion by Uriel and coming back. Just because it was a trashed idea for a game concept doesn't mean that it may not ever happen, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? It could still be there.
that's essentially what I said. Like, they might use it for Elder Scrolls 6. I don't remember who it was, but another YouTuber I was messaging with, like, at the end of 2019, when the whole Redfall quote-unquote leak happened, when Bethesda trademarked the term Redfall. He said that it might mean that Uriel the Fifth returns to Tamriel to reclaim his empire, and that they might still use it for Elder Scrolls 6. I mean, it's possible, but we don't know what Bethesda will go with. But I'll give you that it's still possible, and that's a lot more possible than most of the ideas that I have for it myself. Simply because for the fact that we know that this has been on Bethesda's mind.
Yeah, and like, going back to like Second Great War speculation, if that were to happen and Uriel Septim did come back, he would be a technical rightful ruler to the throne. And at this time, depending on if you did the the Dark Brotherhood questline, killing Titus Mead II, or if he dies of old age and if he had any children, he could technically come and reclaim the Ruby Throne from any one of the Mead pretenders, or if there is no Mead dynasties left, if an Elder Council puppet is put up there, he could still make his claim back to the throne, I feel like.
I'm not sure on that one. I'll make this my closing remarks on it, because I think that it's a very interesting topic. I remember doing a video on it where the question is, would a Septim Emperor truly be, if Uriel survived, would he truly be a legitimate heir to the throne? Because what defines the word legitimacy in current day Tamriel? Because in the past it was that the Emperor had legitimacy as a Dragonborn, and the whole reason that the Dragonborns were allowed to rule, because they kept Tamriel safe against the threat from Oblivion by relighting the Dragonfires. But now that that's no longer an issue, how does being Dragonborn make anyone have a more right to the throne than, for example, the Mead Emperors? Because the Mead Emperors, at least, they have the legitimacy of uniting the Empire again after it completely fell apart when High Chancellor Orkato was assassinated. But what legitimacy would a Dragonborn Emperor have? Like, I don't know how the people of Tamriel would view that. So that's at least like more of a question that I usually ask myself. Like, yeah, what kind of legitimacy would they have in the end? Because of their blood. Because their blood is, well, I don't want to say useless, but it's no longer what it used to be, and it no longer is the way to provide legitimacy, because they no longer protect Tamriel against the threat from Oblivion.
I think it is just name and tradition. That would be their legitimacy towards the throne, would be name and tradition. And say if Uriel did come back with a Sayasi Akaviri quote Dragon Guard army again, then they would ensure his way to the throne again, and maybe everybody would bow to him as an emperor. I believe Skyrim would be up to that kind of leadership, because how they are in their tradition and Dragonborn way, like how they treat our Dragonborn character and how they are for Dragonborn, I feel like they would be for it in that kind of regard. But again, the Myrrh with the Second Great War going on, this is still going on as he comes back during the Second Great War. I feel like the Myrrh of the Somerset Isle and Valenwood would still fight, but with them coming in and taking the throne from a Mead pretender, I feel like they'd have a more momentous power ruler to get them to a victory in that kind of regard, if you know what I'm saying. It may just be their power, the voice, to like help them win, you know?
I know what you're saying, and I mean, it's definitely a possibility, because I definitely didn't say that it was impossible. But it's an interesting thing to think about, like, would tradition and name be enough to do it, and would even being Dragonborn be enough to win over the people of Tamriel? Especially when you think about, it's been more than 200 years since the Septim Dynasty fell, and 200 years is a couple of generations of humans, and all those generations of humans have lived under the Mede dynasty. And yeah, there was the Great War, of course, which might have tainted their legitimacy in the eyes of the people a bit. But the question is, would being Dragonborn be enough? And would it be enough? And I don't have an answer to it. And I definitely concede that it's a possibility that it would be enough. But I honestly don't know whether it would be enough or not in this kind of sense.
I mean, I don't really know either, but it just, I guess in my head, I would rather bow down to someone with power than someone that's saying, hey, I took over the throne, y'all listen to me now. But at least Uriel, he had the experience to rule already. You know, he already had the experience of ruling before he went to Akavir and Ionis and all, and before the Imperial Legion there was defeated. If he is still alive, he'd already have the experience to rule. While at this time, day and age, if the Second Great were to happen, there'd be a Mede Emperor that has no experience at all whatsoever. And I feel like a stronger leader would be the best thing for a new united Septim Empire, if you know what I'm saying.
I agree with the basic concept of what you're saying, but the thing is that someone from the Mede dynasty, especially with the fact that the Mede dynasty have proved at least somewhat competent emperors, I mean, at least the last one, you could say that the opinions on that are divided, but they would also have name recognition and tradition to them, to the people of Tamriel who live there now, because as I said, 200 years of human history is a couple of generations. So, like, I'm honestly not sure, and I don't have the answers to that. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, and I can definitely agree to that.
Right.
So yeah, I think we've had most of the points.
I
Yeah.
guess we could say that whoever fought or started the Great War, I think it would be fought into another standstill, but in just a separate part of the entire continent of Tamriel, depending on momentum and such. And if there's other speculations and things that can happen with other things or other people joining in or power from either side, it could help further the war on. But in the end, I think a second Great War would be inevitable, but just fall to another standstill again.
Yeah, I mean, to end this, I guess we'd only know once Bethesda writes it.
Yes, I agree.
I want to thank you for the discussion. I hope you had fun as well with it.
Yes,
I did.
very fun.
Yeah, so I have to agree. It was a lot of fun, but when I think about it, I agreed on a lot with you, meaning that this was more of a discussion than a debate. Because with the previous person, I completely disagreed. So it was less of a heated debate and more of a discussion, which I really enjoyed on my part.
Yeah. I'm sorry that we went away from the debate.
No, that's no problem.
Idea.
This went. It wasn't too far. Anyway, I think this is a good point to head off.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody who was listening and everybody who's been watching on YouTube in the future YouTube upload. I want to thank Mr. HeathVO or the Russian for debating with me. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next lore debate, I think.
Right.
Let's see.
See you, everybody. Thanks for having me.